welcome to the Disability Dialogue. Thanks so much for coming. We're hoping that this is not so much like a sitcom where you see a cross-section of our living room while we just talk to one another. We hope that it's a dialogue that involves and welcomes everybody who's here. That's our main agenda. And so that's part of how we've organized things, is that we've already solicited feedback about the C's disability policy. The background on that is that there's been a committee on disability issues in college composition for a dozen years or more, and that group was tasked with creating a policy on disability. It's what I'm projecting. No, I'm not. It's what I was projecting on the screen, and I will bring it back somehow. The policy is somewhat extensive, so there's a handout. Within the policy, there are bolded and italicized headings that are some of the main points of the policy. There it is. It's up on the screen right now. It was a watershed moment, or a kind of big validation for the work that had been done on disability issues within college composition, to have the policy, to be asked to create one, and then to have created one that passed through the executive committee and was approved by the Cs. And now that it's been around for a while, it's actually perfect timing to have a conversation about what the policy is doing for you and your colleagues here and at your institution, what it's doing for your students, what it's doing for the future of your organization and institution and the future of those students. So we've already solicited some feedback from people to know more about their thoughts about the policy, and we're going to try and fold or sew that feedback into our discussion while we invite more from you as we move along. My name's Dolmage, and I'm the current but outgoing chair of the CDICC, and I'm from the University of Waterloo.
And I'm Amy Vidali. I'm from the University of Colorado at Denver. I realize now that I did not make enough handouts. I thought I was being ambitious at 25. I'm glad I don't have enough that you're here, but sorry that there aren't more. Just a few comments about access. We really want to encourage some flexibility in the use of the space. This is supposed to be a different kind of space than what we usually do a panel in. And I may even at some point, so that I don't get sleepy in my chair, get up, move around, try and use a little bit of the full space. But if you have any need to get up, move around, if something's not working for you, if we've read something on the screen and you'd like us to read it again, any of those comments, we really just want to welcome you to make those at any point during the session.
My turn?
Yeah.
Okay. This is Sushil Oswal, University of Washington, both Tacoma and Seattle. And I would ask you to, as you participate in this dialogue with us, look around and see what kind of space 4Cs is at this time. A lot of work has been done in the area of access, but who is being served, who is not being served, or who is not being served adequately?
We have note cards that are coming around, and those are for you to ask questions or share ideas or make comments. We'll come and collect those intermittently, and that's a way to participate in the dialogue without having to put your hand up or speak into a microphone. So consider those another way to participate. There's also a hashtag. Have we decided on have we landed on a, Franny? G-Dialogue. Okay, so the hashtag is G-Dialogue? Okay, with a C's involved or just a G-Dialogue? Okay, great. All right.
Margaret.
How is dialogue spelled for that hashtag?
I'm guessing D-I-A-L-O-G?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And the video of the dialogue we will circulate, so as a way to invite people in who aren't here, but Twitter is a way to do that right now. Okay? So the first question that we solicited feedback on was just simply, are you familiar with this policy? And maybe if I can, I'd ask that question of this group because it's a kind of a yes-no. For some of you, oh, this is not projecting again, but me mentioning a policy on disability, how many of you, for you, this was the first time you'd heard there was a policy on disability? So a few people. I'm seeing, yeah, half a dozen hands. I think that's important, right? That it's revealing. So, you know, the question kind of is, we know it's much better to have a policy than not to have a policy. Absolutely. It's proof that the organization cares about these issues. It affirms disability as a key concern within the Cs, and as a big contributing part of the Cs. That's the other thing, not just as an issue that's being dealt with, but as a constituency group, as an area from which innovation and ideas come. That's really important. But I also think that not just that show of hands, but also the feedback we got seemed to suggest that we need more than a policy. We have to ask, you know, the kind of question, if a tree falls in the forest, if there's a policy on a website, but a lot of people don't know it's there, then what is it doing? And what are the things that need to grow up around a policy to bring it to life? So we invite your feedback or thoughts about that now, but I also turn it over to Sushil and Amy if they have any thoughts about that first point.
I think we could hear, you know, people in the dialogue here. What do you think? You know, how could it be brought to the forefront so that people who may not be here in the room today, but next year they would know that there is a policy and what is the purpose of it?
Question from Stephanie?
This is Stephanie. I'm going to ask if you could people clarify where they so that I'm
Yes, absolutely.
Can we get you a microphone?
There's a microphone coming here too. Thanks.
Hi, this is Stephanie. Is the microphone working?
Mm-hmm.
Great. One thing that I thought about a lot when the survey that you said came to me was the fact that I had never really used the policy, even though I had been a part of some of the early conversations when the policy was put together. And so one question that I'm thinking about is how might the policy get used in productive ways in venues like tenure and promotion cases, or in job applications, or in various ways to advocate for things people need. That seems like a place where I don't have a concrete answers, but I'm thinking a lot about that.
Well, if I can sort of jump ahead, the second question we asked was really about the effect of the policy beyond Cs in departments, on campuses. And I think that's part of what we may want to think about extending is people seem to have some concrete responses about how it's changed their experience at Cs, but they weren't really extending the policy beyond that space. The kind of responses I got is that it could have been used on departments and campuses, but it really hasn't been, although some people did note they felt the policy was useful in creating accessible classes and in having a policy when they were facing resistance in their departments. I just want to read a quote from one respondent. Said, imagine how helpful it would be to point to a policy form a professional national organization had created instead of first having to point to the law, by which they meant the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I thought that was useful, but at the same time, I wondered if we don't need sort of a different kind of policy or document or resolution. Cs has a lot of different ways into these conversations to make the policy more relevant for what's going on campus, on your particular campus.
I'm thinking, and maybe I can put this out to people, I'm thinking of a few different specific tangible scenarios. So, and these come in some ways from personal experience, but also from some research. So one scenario, just found out on my campus that individual departments pay for accommodations for faculty out of their department budget, which is really wrong, as it forces faculty members to go to their department chair and disclose disability. In times of tightening budgets, that chair could resent that request. The chair is the person who weighs in quite heavily on tenure and promotion decisions, on hiring, et cetera, and so on. And I'm imagining that that same very broken mechanism is in place many different places. The solution is simple, and a lot of places do follow the best practices. But I wonder whether there shouldn't be some specific language around disability accommodation for faculty. Also thinking about hiring. Stephanie and I have done some work around looking at how job ads talk more and more about disability or include disability in a diversity statement. And yet other job ads are now starting to talk about the minimal, what's the language? I'm blanking. Essential functions for a job. And those essential functions can often have nothing to do with the work of the intellectual work of the job. And they seem to be there to empower schools to not hire somebody or allow them to fire somebody. So that's just one other scenario. And then the final scenario is not coming into my brain right now, but in some ways I don't want to suck up the space with the scenarios because maybe other people can think of more tangible things. Any thoughts about? The other one was, was simply to have, and this is something we're going to push for out of the CDICC, I hope, to have an accommodation letter that actually works for writing classes. The accommodation letters that we get are about exams and lectures most often, and there should be an accommodation letter that maybe we can have the stamp of the Cs or the NCTE on that actually works within writing classes. Yes? If you don't mind saying your name too. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mariana. I guess the thought that comes into my mind in terms of enacting this policy in more concrete, absolutely. I could put it right there. Okay. So my name is Mariana, and my thought of enacting this policy more, if that's what you're asking for, I think about faculty training and graduate training. I'm hungry as a graduate student for any sort of information about how to be a better teacher and how to be more inclusive and accessible. Some best practices for faculty development and training for working with students with disabilities, I think would be something that would be very important as a way to enact the policy a little bit more in departments and on campuses.
So she spoke about developing some best practices around teaching. I know the sound in here is a little sort of bouncing off the walls. I guess the issue I'm wondering is, do we sort of take that on ourselves? And if people don't know what the CDICC is, it's the Committee on Disability Issues in College Composition, or do we seek some sort of more formalized policy? I initially felt like our policy is so broad, we need more tangible things to hold on to, but then when I actually went to the C's website, I realized there are only 21 policies at all, right? 7 on professional issues, which includes ours, 5 on digital literacy, 5 on language issues, and 2 on ethical issues. So then I started wondering, well, I feel like we need 3 or 4 more policies on disability to address sort of tenure guidelines, to address teaching practices. But then I'm not sure if that's the best venue as we start to think about what we want.
Could I bring in another committee's work here at 4C's Online Writing Instruction Committee was formed in 2007. And at that time, its charge was to study, basically, online writing instruction. But as time went on, that committee had very similar problem that you're writing a policy, but it's a document, you don't know how it would be useful to people in actually on campuses, and also solving problems. So what that committee eventually in 2011 did was that if one, it surveyed nationally what was going on in that area, online writing instruction, and then they also formed a large team of experts in the area from all over the country. And as a result of that, it came out with a 35-page document. It's called Effective Practices now. Originally, it was named Online Writing Instruction Policy. So I'm wondering if that kind of document, which is broken into 15 parts, and they address different issues, training in writing, instruction, faculty issues, student issues, all of that, possibly will something like that in this area also help us? And the functioning of that committee was also different, that it expanded from a committee that just meets once a year and does some work. It actually became a very active committee, and it still is. It meets every month online, and it had to really put a lot of work to come out with those solutions. So I talked for a long time, but we would like to hear, what you guys are thinking.
Sushil, before we get, since no one's raised their hand yet, do you feel like that document has been taken up in useful ways by Cs and beyond?
Yeah, there are, last year as well as this year, there are multiple panels actually that are looking at the document. We are also getting news from different campuses, how they are trying to apply. And of course, there are questions about it. Someone was very upset that we limited the size of classes, for example, for online writing instruction, because our research showed that actually you need to do a lot of work to set up a class. But we also dealt with issues such as exploitation of adjuncts in these, or giving people templates and basically telling them to run those templates. So those issues are now very certainly they have been foregrounded in this area, and people are coming back. We also do workshops every year, and that's where we hear back from people how the policy is being used. I'm not saying that there are hundreds of universities that are using it. There are definitely dozens of universities that are adding that policy to. Most recent was last night. I was talking to folks from Arizona State, and they have actually developed their first year program around the effective principles from this committee. That's how they have this last year structured the whole program around.
Maybe if I can take that and this thread and turn it into a question for you all. If you are or were to set up a program where you're training graduate students or faculty, and you're wanting to raise awareness about disability issues or build that into the training or build the entire training around that, how would you do that, or how have you done that? Is the policy part of that?
Oh no, it's fine. I was actually waiting for a response. Could you repeat that? Oh, yeah, sorry. I was waiting for a response from the audience so I can run the microphone to them.
So, hi, this is Tara. Hopefully everyone can see and hear me okay. So, I feel a little bit embarrassed and ashamed to admit that I have held brown bags and workshops for faculty training across campus, and I have not used the policy, but I've done things where I'll ask them to, we'll focus on one thing, whether it's their syllabus statement or to bring in an actual writing assignment, and then we try to build the faculty workshop around a specific thing. But maybe one way to do that is to have that the focus be the actual policy statement itself and bring that into the conversation and try to see what it would look like on my current campus. And it might also be useful to have like a framework that is associated with the policy that people could readily pick up, right? So that they don't have to sort of just have the policy itself, but they could have a sort of ready to go help guide for how you might operationalize something like that on your campus along with the policy statement.
I just, while the mic's coming, I'm thinking like Tara has been part of a collaboration that created a statement about disability statements. And it's great because it's portable and easy to circulate. It's through Kairos, so I can send that URL, and I send it before every semester to all my colleagues and graduate students, right, while they're planning their syllabi. So it's perfect for that. It's portable in that way, and I think that's what the policy maybe isn't. You know, it's too big and broad. If we had parts of it to pull out that we could send around with suggestions, it might be something that's more actionable.
Hi, my name is Jennifer. I also haven't been using the policy, but I'm thinking the most powerful voice I have on my campus are my students, particularly my students that have disabilities. And often, I'm a writing center director, so often I will partner with our student disabilities services director, and she will pull those students in to come talk to the tutors, to come talk to the faculty. And what I can see happening is those voices making the policy real. So I think what I'll think about doing is when we do those workshops, afterwards pulling the policy, handing it out to them, making it, you know, really explicit for them. Now, here are the stories for why this policy is important.
Yeah, my name's Clint, and I'm a writing center director as well, and we represent. And what we've tried to do is work collaboratively with the tutoring staff to figure out and as well as our we have a specific disability person now in our department. You know Melissa Helquist, I'm at Salt Lake Community College. We've been coordinating with her to do an assessment of our writing center work, as well as to connect that with the International Writing Centers Association policy statement on disability. And just trying to get a sense of where we're at right now in regards to how the statement could apply to a writing center, which, you know, doesn't necessarily always. It seems to be mostly focused on class curricular work. And that may be something to consider in the future with the policy, is how this impacts other types of educational environments within an institution.
Thank you.
See, I didn't even know there was an International Writing Center Association policy on disability, and that's... Yeah, I absolutely will.
He said it's on writingcenters.org. So we have someone back here, and then you. Go ahead.
My name is Rich Rice. I'm at Texas Tech. I want to follow up on something Sushil suggested. There was a book released, I think, just last week called The Foundational Practices of Online Writing Instruction by Beth Hewitt and Kevin Eric Depew. In there, it's available on the WAC Clearinghouse, which is a free download in PDF form. And there is a chapter in there called Administrative Decisions for OWI by Deborah Minter. And the chapter outlines a number of different possibilities of integrating principles to administration. I think one solid thing that I would recommend if I had the opportunity to do so would be for chairs to include in annual reviews specific principles that people are following. And that sort of would trickle up towards to deans and other people as a model of, you know, these are the types of things we want to support and recognize.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Christiane. I can sympathize with the graduate student who spoke earlier because I also feel that I'm swimming in muddy waters all the time. Inspired by last year's 4Cs and also by the one online article, Multimodality in Motion. I tried to come up with an accessibility clause instead of a disability clause, but I felt quite uneasy still about it because it is considered a legal class at universities and everything is delegated to the Department of Disability Studies. So I felt I'd write something up that kind of sounds good because I pulled from other sources, but is it really legally solid? Does it really hold its ground in case something happens? And then again, with regards to teaching, inspired by the Kairos article, I try to use different modes all the time, multiple modes all the time to kind of address the audiences in different ways. But still, it would be very, very helpful to have like examples, links that were connected, for example, to the policy statement, which I'm ashamed I did not know about, so that there might perhaps be samples popping up how one could formulate such a statement that is legally solid and meaningful, but also not stepping maybe on the foot of some disability departments who think that that is their ground and their political act to do on campus.
It's a very campus-specific difference, right? I mean, I think there are some campuses where the relationship between disability studies scholars and disability student services, whatever it's called, is really strong, and other places where it's in competition. I think that's what makes it so hard sometimes to try and draw up some of those examples. I know I struggle with that when I go to other campuses, is I don't fully understand the relationship, but maybe we just need some sort of best practices that even articulate that, sort of, come to understand how disability services works on your campus.
Yeah, and in my experience, it's unlikely to get a kind of policy, a campus policy that's written in the kind of language you'd like, because there is this big compromise that happens because the accommodations that are offered out of disability services are written towards the ADA rather than towards the students, right? But I feel like it's okay. It's not a big compromise to shift the framework towards, you could consider these other range of accommodations, for example, right? Because without something like that, then the approach really is just, these are the only things you can do, right? It's not just the legal minimum, right? It's also a maximum. So,
Jay, I want to kind of dialogue with you on this. Some of the subtext of this university policy being very legal or legally centered is that if you go to disability services, they would say that faculty don't want to engage with disability. All they want is a letter from our office saying this is what you have to do for this student, and they also want to know what is the minimal I have to do, not maximum. And we are not, we are a group here that have some commitment to disability. That's why we are here. But then there are so many other faculty who think this is additional workload for us. So coming back to the policy of 4C's disability policy, I see that it's possible that 4C's can play a role, at least pushing writing faculty who are not into disability or accessibility issues. If we write a policy which very specifically gives guidelines that this is what we believe should be happening in classrooms, this is what should happen with the tenure and promotion process when we are working with disabled faculty, this is what infrastructure should be. I think it's possible that we might at least bring some more people on board from our fields, at least our fields.
I'll just add as an end note that I like to remind myself that the university's requirement to meet legal obligations, which I agree is a minimum, is not dependent on how I talk about it in my syllabus. That obligation is always there So why don't I make what I say in my syllabus as progressive as I can, knowing that that legal obligation does not change?
Hello. My name is Ruth Osorio, O-S-O-R-I-O. And I'm going to shift back because Amy, you asked an interesting question of like, how many policies can we write? And I was thinking one way to think about that is it's really important to have disability-specific policies, but also to make sure that disability is mentioned in all the other policies. So I just did, we have a policy on beginning composition and rhetoric faculty guidelines, and I just did Control F, so there could be mentioned, but there's no disability is not in there, and accommodation is not in there. And so also thinking, and I don't know how these policies are written, I'm fairly new to the field, so I don't know if they're very like insular, but thinking about how we can do that, especially thinking about yesterday's panel, and Sushil was talking about being a beginning faculty member and trying to fight for accommodations. And so how can we also make sure that disability and access are mentioned in other C's policies as well?
Ruth, you have made, put your finger on a very, very important issue. Like we here, this group or CDIC group, we can keep on doing things, and if the rest of the 4Cs just keeps on carrying their own business, that's not going to make a change very fast. It'll take a couple of 100 years to get there, and our student populations will probably be much larger. This is where I'm sorry I'm bringing it back, but I think this audience should look at online writing instruction effective principles. That's what we did, and we actually have put accessibility in online instruction at every level. Yeah. Every level. That's why that document, when you read it, it sounds like it's another disability policy, but it uses the word accessibility more often than disability, because we actually try to do some intersectional work for both acceptance purposes, but also to bring other constituencies on board with us. That is, we combined disability, English language learner constituency, as well as, say, people who are living in rural areas, distant. This was online writing instruction. And we paired them together, but at the same time, when we used examples in each of those 15 directives or principles, we gave examples from each area so that disability doesn't get lost.
Wow. Awesome.
Yeah, I think that's a positive case where Sushil's involvement made a big difference, and accessibility is the first principle too.
Predominant.
Yeah, and so we need to sort of nurture some of those connections and have people working. And the C's actually really it's part of the charge of the Committee on Disability Issues is to work with other committees and SIGs. And so we try to do that as much as possible. But if you're somebody who has, like on Thursday and Friday nights, a hard time picking which place to go, then hopefully we can talk about ways to create those bridges and collaborations, conversations.
Yeah, we will try to find that link to the book that Rich Rice mentioned. This is the first book in the field of writing studies where you will find that every chapter touches on accessibility. Not my chapter, every chapter. And the longest chapter in the book is on accessibility principle number 1. It's all. So I will really encourage you to look at it, not because you teach online writing now, but more to think about models that we might like to come up with to deal with the different aspects, different functions of the 4 Cs, how we can bring accessibility to those functions.
Patty?
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Patricia, I want to go back to what people were saying about accessibility, making it more visible on campuses. And I think that the policies and the law and the articles are incredibly valuable. But I also think that interpersonal relationships and one-on-one, one-to-one contacts are really helpful. I teach grad students and on how to teach writing, how to teach literature. And I try to just spread the word. A lot of them are overwhelmed when I show them the policy, like they've never heard of this, they don't know what to do, they just kind of shut down a little bit. They have good intentions, but they have no idea how to start. And I say to them, you know, you don't have to know everything about this, but you need to be the one at a planning meeting to say this needs to be accessible. Because there's a lot of planning meetings and it just doesn't get mentioned. And a person doesn't have to be an expert on disability access and technology to say this online course, these materials must be made accessible. And be the one to say that and get it in the meeting, get it in the minutes, even if the individual doesn't know exactly how to do that. They can be the one who brings it up at a meeting where the bigwigs are.
This is probably also a chance, if you're in our mentor-mentee program, because I think some of those, it can be hard, maybe if you're a graduate student, to sort of insert yourselves in some of those ways to make that kind of change, to sort of contact a mentor who can do some back channeling or give you some ideas of how to do that. I know now it's not difficult for me to bring up in meetings that things should be accessible, but was much more challenging when I was still a graduate student.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Donaldson, and this is my first time here at 4Cs, but I'm also the outgoing chair of the Committee on Disability Issues in the Profession for the MLA. And one of the things that we are looking at and concerned about are the accommodation issues of faculty on campus, and especially those who are junior faculty. And so we've been exploring, you know, should we write up a policy? And so I think it might be really interesting to kind of partner if you guys, or at least dialogue and connect, so we aren't always trying to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. So I'd really like to help make that happen.
Yeah. That would be wonderful. The other thing, it was the case that I forgot before, but just the issue for contingent faculty.
Yes.
The case law is not holding up right now when people are being fired or not rehired because they've asked for accommodations. The case law is not supporting them when they've made claims.
Right.
And so I think there really need to be policies in place to ensure that asking for an accommodation while contingent is not a way to end your career.
Right, and we have the AAUP policy, which is useful, but it also kind of, oh, I'm sorry. We have the AAUP policy, which is also helpful to go to, but it doesn't do enough, right? But as far when you were talking about case scenarios, I remember another one of a faculty member who has to pay extra for her accessible parking on campus, and it's a lot of money too. It seems like a really undue burden to put on someone.
And I appreciate you speaking louder. Most of the speakers are going towards you all, so we're sort of in a sound cloud up here. So as loud as you can speak would be great.
Hi, this is Matt. One thing that I'm noticing in kind of the conversations, Matt, closer? Perfect. Sorry, hate microphones. One thing I'm noticing is kind of this disjointedness in we're all coming from different parts of the country and trying to come together for one policy. One idea that it may or may not work, or it may not be feasible, is the idea of trying to get in touch with either local members or institutions that are nearby each other as kind of a local, either community or local group, to kind of bring up the issues within each institution, and then be able to report back kind of a yearly thing in thinking about kind of the local issues and seeing what issues are more pervasive, which issues might be solutions across the country somewhere else that you never thought to think about or never thought to communicate with. I was looking on the Disability Rhetoric website, and I saw there's a list of grad programs, but that link is currently broken. But it might be better to actually try to map out who are the faculty, who are the grad students, where are people located, and who would be willing to kind of talk within local communities to try to enact something larger, whether that be a few institutions, whether that be a few different programs. But I feel like a lot of people are coming from the one or two people within their department, and trying to enact that much change within the department or within the campus is a lot to put on one or two people versus trying to collaborate with more institutions around your local area.
So are you thinking of something like having regional coalitions that might come together every year here, but they function regionally and they support different programs or different faculty members?
Yeah, possibly something like that. Maybe just even a way to communicate, possibly over email, possibly have either once a month, once every 2 month type of meetings to go over what issues, what successes are happening within your local area, or a local institution within your local area, to kind of come up with what are the big issues possibly within, say, one area to bring up within this type of conversation, versus each person kind of saying, I have this issue with my campus, I have this one with my campus. We can start thinking about, well, what are the major policy kind of overarching issues, and how can we work on those, versus which ones may be very worthwhile, but very worthwhile in very specific locations, and be able to then tie a better connectedness to who can solve certain issues, or who have had successes within their institutions given certain problems.
I think it's possible. We live in a multimodal age, and I only have to go outside 4Cs. I don't have any experience inside this organization of this type, but other activist organizations do that. I work with the Federation of the Blind, National Federation. So the way that organization works is it does have regional groups of this type, issue oriented, and there is a monthly call. So last Sunday of every month, there's a monthly call. People get online and the phone lines, and people talk. These are blind people, so they don't need a lot of visual stimulation, but that can be done with the kind of conferencing systems we have today. The question would be, at least, I would actually go to both of these presenters or participants here. They have a lot more experience within 4Cs of how to organize something like that under the overall umbrella of CDIC or Disability Sick Care.
Maybe can we pause and advertise some of the
Sure.
things we do?
Yeah.
Sure.
Do you want to talk about disability rhetoric? I mean, one thing is we've been mentioning the CDICC. It's an open meeting every year. It's tonight from 5 to 7. Everyone's invited. It's in room 4, so just down around the corner here in the convention center. If you don't want to come to the meeting, but you are very interested in the issues, or you can't come, then you can join the DSRET listserv, and I'll try and spell that out, or maybe Amy can help me. But the minutes from the CDICC always get circulated on that listserv. It's used for other things, but it's also used to make sure that people can be looped in. It's a way to take part. If you're part of that listserv, you can take part at the CDICC access table here at the conference every year.
If you want to get on the listserv, you can go to disabilityrhetoric.com and self-add, or it'll link you to the webmaster, who's currently Dev Bose. But I feel like the listserv is doing some important work to problem solve some of these issues. I mean, I'm always hesitant to say a listserv is a safe space necessarily to talk about anything. But at the same time, it's a way to sort of reach out and get a contact in the ways that we're talking about. You know, has anyone at your university done X, or has anyone experienced X, and then continue the conversation offline, I think happens quite a lot.
And the Disability Rhetoric has a mentoring setup as well, where you can be matched with a mentor or a mentee. And that might be a way, that form, if you filled it in a way that said you're looking for some regional support to work with somebody, that match could be made. I think that's been very successful. The other website to look at is Composing Access. I believe it's composingaccess.com.
I think it's net.
.net, my bad. So .net, and that's a place where there are some things up there, some videos, some multimedia things accessible, but that you could share with people to give them examples of specific things they could do. And it's been oriented in some ways around the conference and making conferences and conference presentations and the ways we share our research more accessible. That is another point on our sort of agenda to talk about, but we don't have to move there exactly yet, but maybe I'll open that up. The other question we wanted to ask was, how has this policy in tangible ways impacted or changed your experience of being at the SEAS conference, or how could it do more?
Yeah, I want to say one of the questions that I gathered response to was what was missing from the policy. And I know a lot of the discussions around disability have been about audience and disclosure and change, and that the sort of climate we're having in here where we're making really good suggestions about how we can sort of make change beyond this room, how we can sort of make people who don't get it, actually differs somewhat significantly from the responses that we received to the survey that spoke a lot more about experiencing discrimination, sometimes at SEAS, sometimes not, experiences that, not having a welcoming environment, particularly around neurodiversity on the WPA listserv. And I don't want to guide the conversation necessarily back to that, but I can't sort of help but notice that the contrast. Another suggestion was that the policy doesn't really evidence what disability discrimination might look like. Which I thought was really relevant, that it's, the policy assumes it would be egregious when it can be quite subtle. So I just wanted to take a moment and invite those kinds of responses as well.
Okay, so do I need the microphone? Can you guys?
Yes, you need it.
I do. Okay, is this better? All right. So without going into any detail about my embodied experience, I'm just going to ask the question, with a little background. When SEAS is held in one hotel in a large city, as it has been in New York, as it has been in Chicago, access is much easier. However, when the convention is held in small cities, Indianapolis and here in Tampa, with different hotels and convention centers, access is a huge problem from a deeply embodied. I have stories from Indianapolis and stories from Tampa, as I'm sure you all do, and a much older story from San Antonio. With different, and access is also a huge problem in terms of flying too, because multiple connections and layovers and red eyes and things like that, and not to mention that the expense is increased as well. So my question is really very simple. What can we do about this? And I know for the next 5 years, it kind of looks like what it looks like.
It looks
now.
like, you mean it seems to be in smaller cities?
Smaller cities, yeah.
Comparatively.
Yeah, and I'm not sure about what the convention center aspect of it is, but it's not a friendly space when you have to be walking all over the place for all kinds of disabilities or differences.
Yeah.
So.
We have a few responses to that. Yeah.
So I'm Casey Cobos, CASIE-COBOS. We just had, with Jen Wingard, our first local meeting for the Houston conference next year, and I happen to live downtown Houston, so it is an across-the-street hotel convention center. So I'm letting you know up front. But she also informed us that one of the reasons, and this is not an excuse, I'm just giving background for why it's looking like this, is that they've moved to mid-level cities. Even though Houston's number 4, it has mid-level pricing because of access that way. And so it's become like but I think that, because I asked specifically in that meeting, like, is there going to be a disability representative, a SIG or from the SDIC, come and actually walk the city, because there are buses available for accessibility, but if someone doesn't go and actually see those things, then there's no way of informing.
I've got it. Hold on 2 seconds. I'm going to read for somebody else if that's okay, or do you want to respond right? Okay. All right, so Margaret has a couple of questions, but she's got a cold. Oh, always the directional thing. There you go. So Margaret has a couple questions, but she has a cold, so I'm going to read them for her. So the two comments, the first one is, one of the great things about the policy, in her opinion, is how it articulates how disability matters and why it's important, and how it aligns with the wider values of the Cs. So thank you to those who helped put it together. Number two is, I am happy we're talking about how to make this a living document that informs practice. One idea, I think modeling is really crucial, demystifying inclusive practices. Could we try to get, and this is in quotes, radically, inclusive presentations more widespread at 4Cs, inviting panels to apply, hold on 2 seconds, to be part of web-based workshops and plan an access-conscious inclusive panel. Panels could be marked in the program and that could get access on even more folks' radar. P.S. I love that the videos on the 4Cs website were captioned. Yeah, that was big.
We can thank Joyce for that. I mean, I like the idea. I think it is, at least my experience, and this is more personal, is it's really hard to challenge sort of how things work, right? I am sitting up here with these signs that I made because I was talking yesterday in a panel that I'm not kinesthetic, but I'm trying to be, where I wrote some of the concerns that people had on the signs to sort of interact with, but am having a hard time in this environment even understanding how to kind of use them and get them out, right? And you see my high level of craft. It's pen. If you can't see it, it is pen on a 1 foot by 1.5 foot foam board. But I think that if we want to do this sort of thing where we're being more interactive, that we do have to think about it ahead of time. And that maybe one way to do that is to sort of try and come up with a small group of folks who attend both SDS, the Society for Disability Studies, and 4Cs, because I think SDS is doing some incredible work around these kind of innovative practices. And to have people who attend both those conferences come together and say, how can we sort of import and maybe even be able to see a model of something we'd like to do that's, I like your term, a radical inclusive practice, and shift it over, because I think there just isn't enough history of it here that it's hard to do, even when you intend to.
I just want to follow up very quickly on the mid-sized city issue. Tampa during spring break is not less expensive. When 4Cs is in larger cities, there are many more housing options. There are not very many housing options in Tampa, nor were there in Indianapolis. So any expense of being in a smaller city is taken away by the housing options and also the flight options for many of us, especially when they're not in hub cities. That's one. And also the 3 hotel situation in Houston, the amount of getting lost, the amount of missing parts of sessions because you're getting lost, and in convention center places, things in Tampa tend to look alike, and the hotels tend to look alike. Again, I'm not going to talk about specific experiences, but more in general. This makes it extremely difficult to feel like a full participant because you're constantly, there's things that I've missed, there are things that many people might miss doing because even what might seem like a short distance to someone who is not thinking about their stamina is, if you are thinking about your stamina, it changes immediately. And so there is a lot of frustration that I feel around this policy. The idea of there being 3 convention hotels next year is pretty daunting.
I agree, and I didn't want to take it away. I wanted to say that I specifically told the local committee that we need to have someone there to actually see the site beforehand, because I feel like this, like what you're describing, happened in Las Vegas for eating. It happens over and over, and so I specifically said, like, we need to have someone show up and not just assume that it moves a certain way.
In Las Vegas's favor, it was in one hotel.
Right.
But I know there were other issues with Las Vegas, but it being in one hotel was so incredibly helpful.
Yeah. Can I just say one thing really quickly? Just from my perspective as chair of the CDICC, I have been trying to push this, but we're caught in a loop where it's not the local, by the time things happen, the local arrangements committee can't do anything. It's cooked, it's a contract, right? And these things are negotiated, and nobody is allowed in on the negotiation, right? So who knows what's being considered, right? So there needs to be more advocacy way further ahead, because we can go and measure the number of steps, right, between things, but we can't keep doing that, right? I know the distances which is what we do with the accessibility guide, but if the accessibility guide is just charting and recording how inaccessible things are year after year. Clint, sir.
Yeah, this is definitely an issue I think you can bring to the C's executive board, because the C's executive board is the one that picks the sites. And it's come up, I was on the board 4 years ago now. It's come up occasionally when the discussion of smaller cities, smaller venues, but to call Houston a small city is hard pressed. But I agree, it's the hotel situation that causes that, because there's a lot. I know of severe problems at the C's San Francisco convention, for example, and other areas in New York is not the most accessible city, quite honestly. So
Three hotels and high humidity. And I could argue, and I would probably argue with you about New York's accessibility, but that's another, not for right now. But 3 hotels and high humidity in April, that's going to be an issue for people.
Nice. We have 5. I don't have anything particular. I went over my responses.
So this is Tara speaking again. I hope I'm not redirecting, and if I am, anyone feel free to direct us elsewhere. But I think it connects, at least my question connects to a few people's points so far, and it's about like the difference between, it's a genre question, like a policy statement versus like a practices statement. I know like false binary, let's all attack that, and it's important attacking to be done. But I wonder, like Margaret pointed out how powerful this statement is because of the way that it is affirming things that need affirmation, but we sort of all seem to be mentioning ways where we need it to have some like utility function for us too. So I wonder, as we move the policy forward, if we might think about how it can ambitiously think about how it can do both of those things. Like maybe if we're affirming the need for access at the convention, we then have that statement on the policy, we follow it up with, here's how we need to operationalize that affirmation, right?
Tara? Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Sushil.
Okay. Tara, I think both are not incompatible. The policy statement that we have at this time, that's like a preamble to the action or actions we need for inclusive type of conference or inclusive teaching or inclusive workplaces, academic workplaces. So what I see, this is just sitting here thinking off the top of my head, is that we take this policy, but we also take the concerns of the community and turn them into those practices. People talked about a regional support system, not something really, as I heard it, it wasn't one-on-one support, but kind of mini 4Cs in all areas where we could really function as supporting groups, or very much an ongoing kind of work on actual actions in 4Cs, how venues are chosen, what things are. So really breaking this policy into two parts. One is preamble that gives the philosophy. The other one, really this is how you do it, like a manual, technical manual, that's how. And I also wanted to mention earlier when one of the speakers here was talking about venues, try to imagine this place, a totally blind person trying to navigate. The entrance is here. Anybody try to imagine? I have my 2 young sons with me, and really I had never been to Tampa. That was one of the reasons why I brought them with me, that I knew that otherwise I'm going to struggle to get around. 4Cs has not thought about totally blind people at all. That's why totally blind people don't come. I even stopped coming to 4Cs for many years after finishing my graduate work, mainly because it wasn't. Large print does not help blind people. That's for visually impaired people. No number of signs help. And general attitudes of the people. I have walked into rooms where nobody would talk to me. I'm standing with a 5.5 feet pole in my hand. They know I'm blind. It's a white cane. But there are those issues where organization has to take a stance that we need to bring in these people.
I want to agree, but I think I'm also, it's a smaller part of me, I'm a little bit wary of us, I'm going to refer to us as the Disability Rhetoric Choir, doing all of the work to operationalize the policy. That I think there is this tendency, and those of us who do disability work on our campuses get it a lot, that they sort of want us to take what is a mindset and an activist stance and translate it into a to-do list. And I do not think that's what you mean by practices. But a part of me wants to instead keep the policy as wonderfully broad and vague as it is and ask people to really engage with those concepts on a sort of deeper intellectual level before I, in some sense, solve it down to practices, although I want to do that as well. And I'm suggesting this without having any clear sense of exactly how I would do that. But I just worry sometimes that we do so much work, and that's wonderful, and that's activism, but at the same time, are we sort of relieving broader Cs and institutional responsibility by doing all of that work ourselves?
I think there's 2 things I'm thinking. One is there's another mechanism, which is resolutions. So if there are specific issues that can be addressed in a resolution, right? And it could be, the wording of a resolution could be that the Cs will not decide on venues for the conference without consulting with, or without considering accessibility, right? Physical accessibility, other forms of accessibility. That could be a resolution. And it either gets voted up or down, but I think that would be something that most people would be on board with. So I don't know how people use them afterwards. Do you know what I mean? I think we need to find more out. But the other thing I'm thinking is the book that they have for online writing instruction, is there a version of that that's best practices that's not necessarily a book, or maybe it's a web text or an accessible book that is both a place where you could go for all of the things, but also has pieces you could pull out, right?
Yeah, that's how online writing instruction, it's an online book.
Yeah.
It's also
because I'm constantly having people say, show me something, right? I take your point, I understand the argument you're making, this is wrong what we're doing, show me something, right? Link to something, cite something, right? And I think other people are in that situation too. So having a bunch of those types of things, I think would be a really good way to move forward.
I like the resolution idea because I think it does force some broader buy-in, right? It's not a document we create that nobody but us reads.
Yeah.
I've
Sorry, I'm
Franny.
came on the mic. This is Franny speaking. As a new faculty member, I'm going to admit my ignorance. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing with this policy. Like, so if it had more, like, I agree with it. I am familiar with it, but I do not know what I am supposed to do as a result of it or how to incorporate it into anything that I do. So if it had a little more guidance for not like best practices of accessible pedagogy, but like how to literally use the policy would be really helpful to me. I think I'm not the only one in that position.
No, I don't want to imply, Tara started by saying like, oh, I haven't used this on my campus. I haven't really either. Like, I don't want you to think there's like this secret thing that's happening up here that you're not doing.
Yeah, and you look at other policies like students' right to their own language, you could create a 3-page bibliography of books about students' right to their own language, right? And how it's been implemented and what problems there are with it and ways of bringing it into the classroom, ways of it putting in a conversation with other things. And it's been around 25 years, I think, is the anniversary, right? But it takes that kind. I think that policies in general take that. They require that much more work, right? They're not magic beans, and there have to be a wide variety of ways of working around them. But it does take that kind of work, I think. So 40 years. Is that right? 40 years. Yeah, of course. So we're nearing the end of our time.
Can I follow up really quickly with Franny? This is Casey again. I know you said it allows for open use, but I keep thinking of the new Starbucks idea to put race matters on cups and then expect their baristas to be able to know what to do with them. And that I think that there were some people that had like helpful like the regional coalition, like that sounds awesome because then then you can have those conversations and you're not like, well, my university, you can have those internal that aren't national. But I do think it'd be a little helpful for us to dialogue later or on through Twitter or through disabilityrhetoric.com somewhere for us to think about because a lot of us in this room are interested in disability and access, but what do people do with it who aren't interested in that? That's the same concept of what do baristas do if they care nothing about race?
Before we also wrap up, I would like to note down the name of the person who talked about the regional groups. I would like to follow up on that. Yeah, if you would write.
But I know who he is.
Yeah.
What is the name?
Matthew Zabik.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think I want to promise to follow up.
Yeah.
On a variety of different things. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm going to also place the 6 little signs that I made that really, I think, identify some really concrete omissions around the access table. I understand this is kind of a high-risk space too, and a lot of them are things we said. Maybe the policy reflects what we want more than it reflects the larger organization, concerns around hiring, discrimination, and taking action, and just encourage people to drop by and jot down a note, or even jot down their name if they're just someone who's particularly interested in following up on this particular issue that's on the board.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.